Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Juliette Mann.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. After nearly a decade in the role, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is announcing his resignation.
US Steel and Nippon Steel sue the Biden administration for blocking their $14 billion merger.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi begins his four-country tour of Africa, holding a meeting with Namibia's president-elect and the outgoing leader.
Taking the wheel. We look at how China is promoting the development of driverless technology.
And powering ahead. Wind turbines overtake gas as the UK's biggest electricity source for the first time.
Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is holding a press conference in which he is expected to resign.
CBC News is reporting that Trudeau will announce his plans to step down as leader of the Liberal Party, but will remain in post until his replacement is chosen. Trudeau has been Prime Minister since 2015. Let's listen in.
To advance reconciliation, to defend free trade on this continent, to stand strong with Ukraine and our democracy, and to fight climate change and get our economy ready for the future. We are at a critical moment in the world. Mes chers Canadiens, à chaque matin, je me suis réveillé en tant que Premier ministre, inspiré par la résilience, la générosité et la détermination qui nous caractérisent si bien en tant que Canadiens. C'est ce qui me motive à chaque jour où j'ai le privilège de servir.
Okay, this is Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. He did begin giving this press conference in English, but since he's switched to French, we'll take over for now. He is talking about the high points of his administration, about the goals of restoring democracy, fighting climate change and getting the economy ready for the future. Our correspondent, Evangelos Ipsos, is in Toronto for us, so let's bring him in while we're watching these live pictures now. Evangelo, good to see you. So what is the latest here? We've got Justin Trudeau giving this press conference. What do we expect to happen?
Well, there's two ways that this can go right now. He can either come out and say that he's, as he's speaking right now, saying that he's going to resign, that he's going to hand in his resignation to the Governor General of Canada, and then follow through to the next step, which is appoint an interim Prime Minister who's going to run the government, or he might stay on as Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Party, and he will wait for the elections of the Liberal Party, who's going to get elected in about 90 days from now, and then the leader of the Liberal Party, he's going to step down, and that person, whoever it is, will lead the country. So that's the two ways that this press conference can pretty much go. Now, the reason why Trudeau is coming out to do this, well, there's been a lot of pressure by his own MPs to resign, but there's also a lot of pressure from the Canadian public as well. So the one thing is that he's getting a lot of pressure from his own caucus. He was supposed to meet on Wednesday. During Wednesday, he was expected to announce his resignation, but now we see that he's speaking. That is coming out as a surprise, as if the date. It doesn't come as a surprise as it was going to happen, because people were expecting him to step down. The other thing is here that he's been dropping a lot into the polls. And the latest polls show that he's 20%
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you know what? Justin Trudeau has switched back to English, so we're going to listen into a little bit more. We'll be back with you in a moment.
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process. Last night, I asked the President of the Liberal Party to begin that process. This country deserves a real choice in the next election, and it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election. Mes chers amis, comme vous savez, je suis un fighter.
Justin Trudeau, there, the Prime Minister of Canada, has resigned. He said he will resign until the process is in place for the nationwide comprehensive process for an election to decide a real choice. He says the country deserves a real choice, and that while he's fighting internal battles, he cannot be the best option. Evangelo, let's come back to you in Toronto for us. You said this is what was expected, so now we're going to have this interim period for that election that's going to take place in 90 days' time. So who do you think is going to stand for the Liberal Party? What are the options now?
Well, there's been a lot of names that have been circulating, but nothing concrete, since people didn't know if the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, will step down. Now that we do have that information, the one person that was pretty much up leading the race, or her name pretty much was really topping the charts of being the next leader of the Liberal Party, was Chrystia Freeland, the ex-finance minister of Justin Trudeau. But she resigned just days before announcing the 2025 budget. So her name, as the Canadian media here and Canadian political analysts are saying, is burned in a way, meaning that she will not gain the popularity that she would have had before. But it's not impossible that we might see her name on that ballot of becoming one of the candidates for the Liberal Party. Now, we have 90 days until we see who's going to be the next leader of that party. And then from there on, the person who will be the leader of the Liberal Party will also lead as Prime Minister until the elections come. Let's remind here the public that 2025 is the federal election here in Canada. But because of this instability, there is a possibility that the NDP and the Conservative, the two opposition parties in Parliament, might call for a no-confidence vote, which could lead to an earlier election here in Canada. And that's going to be turmoil. There's going to be a lot of instability, especially at a time where Trump has been elected. And there's a possibility that besides this 25% slap from tariffs to Canada, there might be even more tariffs in more Canadian products. And that's what people are worrying. They're calling for more stability here in Canada, because Trump might find the possibility of creating more insecurity when it comes to Canadian exports towards the U.S.
Evangelo Zipsas in Toronto, thank you very much for bringing us up to date. And that news, if you've just joined us, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has resigned.
And moving on now to the rest of the day's news. China's services sector has expanded at its fastest pace in 7 months. That's according to an independent survey. The country's Caixin services PMI climbed to 52.2 in December, up 0.7% on the previous month. The increase is said to have been driven by a rise in new business inflows.
New data shows China's retail industry climate index has risen to 51.1% this month, up 0.7% on December, and also higher than the same period last year. It's an indication of consumer confidence, with officials saying it is a significant rebound.
Last year, the London Stock Exchange saw the most companies delist or transfer their primary listing since the global financial crisis in 2009, according to the auditing firm EY. 88 companies, including takeaway giant Just Eat, Paddy Power, the betting company, and the travel group TUI, are dropping their main UK listings. In 2024, there were a total of 18 new listings, the lowest number since 2010, when EY started recording data.
French Finance Minister Eric Lombard wants to save $52 billion in the country's 2025 budget, a lower target than his predecessor. He sees the deficit at 5 to 5.5% of GDP, will rework tax hikes on the rich, and hopes the fiscal plan will be agreed next month. The previous government fell to a no-confidence vote in December over plans to reduce what's been called France's colossal debt by cutting spending and raising taxes.
Japan's Nippon Steel and US Steel have filed a federal lawsuit in the United States after the Biden administration blocked a merger.
The companies say Biden's decision was politically motivated and violated their rights. The lawsuit comes after Japan's Prime Minister says there are concerns over the future of Japan-US investment. Biden blocked the takeover of US Steel by Japan's Nippon last week, saying foreign ownership could pose a national security risk. Our correspondent John Terrett is in New York. Great to see you, John. Happy New Year to you. Now, lawsuits are flying over US Steel.
Yes, Happy New Year, Juliet and Paul. You know, this is a very big story here. Nippon and US Steel both going after the US administration, and we're seeing this more and more. The Biden administration has been terrible, really terrible, at approving mergers and acquisitions over the last 4 years, and we've seen companies going after them using the legal system here more and more, including, of course, most famously TikTok, whose oral arguments come up before the Supreme Court of the United States on Friday. But Biden banned the deal between Nippon and US Steel. It's worth just under $15 billion after COFIUS, which is a very powerful committee, was completely deadlocked on the issue of whether it should go ahead or not on national security grounds. Now, Nippon over the weekend has said, for goodness sake, what are you playing at here? There are no national security grounds. We're a great company. They're a great company. We want to take them over, preserve US jobs. What's not to like about that? And certainly, I think the management at US Steel feel the same way, and I think many of the workers feel the same way, but the trade union bosses and the politicians are the ones who are moving to block it from going ahead. Now, at its heart, very serious point coming now. At its heart, this is all about stymieing China's ability to bring steel and aluminum to the world stage, okay? Because the Biden administration is fearful that if Nippon takes control of US Steel, then a couple of years down the road, it will diverge away from US foreign policy regarding the fact that they think in Washington that China is already or is about to flood the world with cheap steel. And that is what this is basically all about. Now, Trump has said that he would go ahead and ban if it falls into his time, which of course it now will, because this legal proceeding is going to take a while. And some breaking news, very important breaking news here, just in the last 15 minutes or so. The Washington Post newspaper, very influential, saying this morning in a report that the Trump administration was rowing back from tough sanctions against countries in the world that it's been targeting. And in the last 15 minutes, Trump coming out and saying that's not true. It's not true. So once again, the sort of target is on those countries like China and Canada and Mexico, and also the European Union as well. In the meantime, US Steel shares up 5%, and Nippon shares in Japan down just under 1%.
So the Trump administration is sure to be all about tariffs, all to be about trade. But John, I have to say I'm very impressed you've made it to the New York Stock Exchange, because all we're hearing is that the weather's terrible where you are, the snow particularly.
Well, the funny thing is, it's not going to come to New York City. Not really. It is snowing now as I look out of the window, which you can't see, and we can't turn the camera around to show you. It's very dark here now, and it is snowing. It began about 20 minutes ago. But we're only really expecting a dusting in New York City for once. Most of it is to the west of us and to the south of us. But it is the worst in 10 years. And in Kansas and Missouri and the Midwest of the country, they're suffering from very severe blizzards at the moment. Washington, D.C. already has 8 inches on the ground, and government offices are closed and schools are closed. And let me let you into a little secret, Juliet. I lived in Washington, D.C. for about 4 years, and Paul did as well, so he'll confirm this.
Yes.
They can't cope with it. They can't cope. They don't have the budget. They don't have the snowplows. They are absolutely in deep trouble. And the last time this happened was about 10 years ago when I lived there. And honestly, it went on for 8 days. Literally, the whole city was seized for 8 days. And there's a chance that this could happen again. And why is that a problem? Well, today is January the 6th, and you know what's happening in Washington today. Thursday is January the 9th, the funeral of President Carter, and the 20th, of course, is the inauguration of you-know-who, and so this could knock it all on. It really could. And they've got snow, they've got ice, they've got high winds, 0 temperatures. The governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, which is the state immediately to the west of us, has declared a state of emergency for the south of the state, because I think it will hit the south of Jersey hard, but probably not New York City. The problem is the polar vortex has slipped. And as you know, you never want your polar vortex to slip too far, but it has done. Normally, it's very, very cold conditions spinning around the North Pole, but it's come all the way down to the southern states of the United States, and that is the problem. But as I say, in New York, certainly at the moment, and we're only expecting a little bit more maybe than a dusting, put it that way.
So we will see you the same time, same place tomorrow. John Terrett at the New York Stock Exchange, thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Well, as John was just saying, in addition to the snow, Washington, D.C. is on high alert ahead of several significant political events this month. The first of which is actually today, January the 6th, when Donald Trump's US presidential election victory will be officially confirmed by Congress.
It was that moment years ago. When Trump had lost to Joe Biden, that prompted his supporters to embark on deadly riots. Our correspondent Poppy Maputing reports.
Security is tight in Washington, D.C., with road closures and barricades being erected ahead of Monday's congressional proceedings, during which Vice President Kamala Harris will certify the 2024 election results, an official constitutional tradition handing over power to the next president. Taking place on January 6th, Monday's election certification will remind Americans of the events that took place on the same day 4 years ago, ahead of Joe Biden's inauguration.
And we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Supporters of Donald Trump, riled up by the former president's repeated claims that the 2020 election had been stolen, descended on Washington, D.C. in an unprecedented and deadly attack on the Capitol. As Trump prepares to return to the White House, the nation's capital is on high security alert and preparing for a number of high-profile events this month. In reaction to the January 6th insurrection, a number of security protocols have been put in place, including the appointment of a new Capitol Police chief, beefing up the Capitol Police force, and providing riot gear for every officer, up from just 25% 4 years ago. The U.S. Capitol Police chief noted that the eyes of the world will be on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Elected officials across the country have faced a heightened threat environment in recent years, so we cannot take any chances when it comes to protecting the members of Congress. Appearing on a national TV network Sunday, Senator Amy Klobuchar underscored the readiness of officials.
We have a plan and a strategy in place. That's not to say there aren't threats all the time on members of Congress or on the Capitol. But I feel very strongly that we have made major shifts.
Following the certification of the election results Monday, Washington, D.C. is also preparing for the state funeral on Thursday of former President Jimmy Carter. Mourners have been paying their respects to Carter this weekend as his body lays in repose in his home state of Georgia. Security will be tight at a planned victory rally near the Capitol a day before the inauguration, and again on January 20th, when President-elect Donald Trump is inaugurated the 47th President of the United States. Poppy Maputing, CGTN, Washington.
You're watching Global Business Europe, still ahead. China's Wang Yi begins 2025 with a tour of Africa, continuing a 35-year tradition.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and the bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN. Welcome back to Global Business Europe. China's Foreign Minister, Wang Yi, is in Namibia at the start of a tour of several African nations.
Wang held a meeting with Namibia's president-elect, who recently made history by being voted in as the country's first female president. Wang Yi also met the outgoing leader. They spoke about a shared future and further developing relations. China says relations with Africa have entered a new stage.
Our correspondent Robert Nagila reports from Windhoek.
Well, this morning, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with Namibia's current Vice President and President-elect Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah at her official residence here in the capital, Windhoek. Now, in that meeting lasting well over an hour, Wang Yi talked about this 3-decade-old tradition of Chinese foreign ministers making Africa their first port of call, so to speak, their first overseas trip of the year, touching the importance that of China's partnership with Africa. He also talked about this shared future for the two peoples, saying that both China and Africa shared a huge history, and were looking forward to a very successful future. Now, this relationship dates back to the 60s, when China was supporting Namibia, for example, in its liberation struggle, as it did with many African countries at that particular time. With Namibia, diplomatic relations were established in 1990 and have simply gone from strength to strength. Now, Wang Yi also talking about China being a reliable partner for Africa, not just on development, but also on other challenges that the continent was facing, saying that China was willing to work with Africa, not just through good times, but through tough times as well, and saying that it would support Africa on the international stage. Now, you recall that Africa has been seeking to get a seat on the United Nations Security Council. So these are just one of the areas where China says it will support Africa's bid on the international stage. After that meeting, Wang Yi flew to Walvis Bay for a meeting with the current president, and is scheduled to depart Namibia tomorrow to Congo-Brazzaville, the next leg of his tour, and after that he'll then visit Chad and then end this four-country tour with Nigeria.
Robert Nagila there. Well, for decades, China and Africa have benefited from strong diplomatic and economic relations. China has been Africa's largest trading partner for 15 consecutive years now. Trade volume between China and the African continent has been steadily increasing year on year. In 2023, it hit a record of more than $282 billion. While China has also implemented a zero-tariff policy for 33 of the least developed countries. It's a move designed to significantly boost opportunities for African businesses targeting the Chinese market. And by the end of 2023, China's direct investment in Africa exceeded $40 billion, making it one of the major sources of inward foreign investment. Alex Vines is the director of the Africa programme at Chatham House, a think tank in London.
35 years consecutive visits by Chinese foreign ministers. So Foreign Minister Wang Yi follows a long tradition now, 35 years. And it's a recognition of China that the African continent, which is over 50 members in the UN General Assembly, is really important for global governance and for voting. Originally, it was the African vote and support that moved the UN Security Council seat to Beijing from Taipei. So China has recognized the importance of Africa and has been very consistent ever since. I mean, you won't find any other foreign minister consistently going to the African continent annually in the way that Chinese foreign ministers have been doing for the last 35 years.
Indeed, so a real priority for Chinese foreign policy. Why were Namibia, the Republic of Congo, Chad and Nigeria selected for this specific trip to Africa?
Yeah, there's a bit of a carousel here where China kind of moves around between English-speaking countries and French-speaking ones. And then for particular reasons, certain countries are chosen. So Namibia's already just had an election. There's a new president there. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why Namibia's on the list. The Republic of Congo is interesting, and I think your viewers should realize for two reasons, I think, that Congo-Brazzaville was chosen. The first is it's the 60th anniversary of China-Republic of Congo relations. That was celebrated at the end of last year, but I think that's an important benchmark. And the second, which is equally important, is that the Republic of Congo has just taken over to be co-chair of the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation in its next cycle, FOCAC, with China. And so for those two reasons, I think Brazzaville was chosen. Nigeria, well, I mean, it's the most populous country in Africa. It will be the most populated, fifth largest country in the world by 2050. And relations between China and Nigeria are robust and complex. And then finally, Chad, I think, is an important visit because France, which has been very close partner to Chad, withdrew its troops and closed its base there at the end of last year, so just a few days ago. And the Chadians are looking to diversify their security partnerships and probably will be looking to China as part of that. So it's an example of multipolarity, I think.
Diplomatically, what do you think will be the key wins for Wang Yi?
Well, China is arguing that there needs to be more genuine multipolarity in the world, that the global governance system has been too dominated by Western countries and therefore biased. And so it's a numbers game. I mean, you have 55 countries registered at the African Union, and that really matters. And so I do think, therefore, getting African support or buy-in to some of the visions that China has for the future is clearly a foreign policy priority.
Israel and Hamas are continuing to argue over details of a potential deal to halt fighting in Gaza and bring the remaining hostages home.
A Hamas official reportedly claims the group has approved a list of 34 Israeli hostages to be exchanged in a possible truce. But the Israeli government has denied receiving a list.
It comes as Palestinian authorities say an intensified Israeli offensive killed more than 100 people over the weekend.
Our correspondent Jonathan Regev is in Tel Aviv.
A lot of controversy regarding this list, something going back a few months. In the morning, it was classified as a list given by Hamas to Israel of people that they're willing to free, but no, it is not exactly clear who is alive and who is not alive. Later on, the Israeli Prime Minister's office releasing a statement saying that this list was actually handed from Israel to Hamas a few months ago and was described as a humanitarian list. Why so? It includes the women, the children, the elderly who are still captive, and also 11 people who are under the age of 50 but were not taken hostage as soldiers. Israel claims that this is the list that was handed to Hamas a few months ago, and now Hamas has approved the list, but Hamas is unwilling to say who is alive and who is not alive. Israel, of course, is saying that in any kind of agreement, if this is only the first stage of the agreement, then Israel is insisting that 34 people alive will be released. Among this list, who is alive, who is not, it is not exactly clear. Hamas is saying that they need at least a week of ceasefire to determine who is alive and who is not, because some of the hostages are held by other organizations in other places of the Gaza Strip, and Hamas cannot verify their condition. So a lot of controversy regarding this list. We do know that the families of the hostages, who are very stressed any day, are extremely stressed today. They're calling this list as a sort of a selection, a very difficult word, saying that some hostages will be freed and others will remain in Gaza to die. Therefore, they're calling on the government to embrace a deal which will bring everybody, even if it would require some very big prices from Israel. Those who oppose this kind of an agreement are saying that the prices demanded by Hamas are simply too high. And just to remind everybody what would happen if Israel would not crush Hamas completely, this according to right-wing elements in the Israeli government, then the example came earlier today in the West Bank, where 3 Israelis were killed in a shooting attack. If Israel does not dismantle Hamas completely in the Gaza Strip, then these kind of operations will also happen there. Say the opponents of the deal, the families are demanding a bigger a bigger agreement which will bring everybody, all of the hostages, alive and not alive, together in one stage. And in between now stands the government, which has to decide. Obviously, the fact that there is a list and there are names brings even more pressure to an already very tense situation.
Disagreements over a potential ceasefire deal come as Israeli forces continue to strike Gaza, killing more than a dozen Palestinians overnight. Our correspondent Rami Al-Magari reports from Gaza.
Palestinians over the past several months have been very looking forward to having or to realizing or to seeing this agreement taking effect in the territory, as they are in much need for relief and for their situation to get improved. Actually, overnight yesterday, when there were some kind of reports suggesting that Israel and Hamas had initially agreed to a ceasefire, a possible ceasefire, people cheered in the streets, and there were some crowds in the central Gaza Strip hailing what they heard about an agreement. A very cheerful sounds from the street. The people thought that there was an actual agreement between Israel and Hamas. And this was not the only scene we saw. We saw this over the past several months. Every time there was a sort of agreement, that people could take out to the streets to express their joy for what they believe to be a ceasefire deal. Actually, the people's expectations are high here in the territory. Optimism and pessimism, whether there will be an agreement in the upcoming days or the agreement will be delayed until the President-elect of the United States come in power. I mean here Donald Trump. Let's hear actually, let's now listen to what Palestinians are saying about a possible ceasefire between Israel and Hamas.
Despite them saying there's a truce coming, planes continue to buzz day and night. We can't sleep. We see no signs. We have no patience left. We have no endurance left. We can't take it anymore.
We hope from God that there will be a deal. No one is left. Many people have been erased from civil records. We hear there's a truce coming, but what's happening behind the scenes, this is what we don't know yet.
This comes against the backdrop of continued Israeli army actions across different parts of the Gaza Strip, including the latest from Khan Yunis, near the Kuwaiti hospital, the field Kuwaiti hospital, where 4 people were killed by an Israeli warplane. That's what has been reported recently, the latest update. Another update is from the Nusayrat refugee camp, where a school was hit by a quadcopter or a small drone attack drone. In the Nusayrat refugee camp, number of people were injured in that shelter school. Another strike hit another home in the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood in Gaza City. Also, bombardments have been heard loudly overnight in the Jabalia refugee camp in the Saftawi neighborhood to the north of Gaza City.
Rami Al-Magari there reporting from Gaza. You can get the highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Austria's far-right leader is given a chance to form the next government as the country's president looks to end political deadlock.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen acts.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story, wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected.
across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Juliette Mann and Paul Barber. The headlines again. After nearly a decade in the role, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau steps down.
This country deserves a real choice in the next election, and it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election.
US Steel and Nippon Steel sue the Biden administration for blocking their $14 billion merger.
And China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi begins his 4-country tour of Africa, holding a meeting with Namibia's president-elect and the outgoing leader.
The leader of Austria's far-right Freedom Party, Herbert Kickl, has been asked to form the country's new coalition government after a meeting with the president in Vienna. Outgoing Chancellor Karl Nehammer resigned following the collapse of coalition talks between mainstream parties, which were aimed at keeping the far-right out of government. The president said he's looking for stability after the country was plunged into political chaos.
Mr. Kickl has the confidence to find viable solutions within the framework of government negotiations, and he wants this responsibility. I asked him that explicitly. I have therefore instructed him to enter into talks with the OVP to form a federal government. Herbert Kickl will report to me on the progress of these talks on an ongoing basis.
Our correspondent Johannes Peschberger is in Vienna. Hi there, Johannes. So what more do we know about the meeting that's taken place?
Well, let's say this definitely was not an easy one for President Alexander Van der Bellen to task Herbert Kickl with forming a government. He tried to avoid this at almost all costs, but he had no alternative. The only alternative would have been snap elections, something Austria really doesn't need right now, given the economic slowdown and the rising debt. Alexander Van der Bellen, Austria's president, he's sort of a figure representing a vast majority of Austrians who did not vote for the Freedom Party. Alexander Van der Bellen is a former leader of the Green Party, and but there's this other part of Austrians, around 30% who voted for the Freedom Party. They feel left alone by the establishment, by the mainstream parties. They feel like the government does not handle well the economic slowdown, the debt, and also immigration, Islamic immigration. They feel like the Austrian identity, the Christian identity is fading away. So the Freedom Party is representing this part of Austrians, a minority, but most Austrians agree there was no alternative to giving them the mandate to form a government. It's almost set in stone now that there will be a Freedom Party chancellor, a coalition with Austria's conservatives. It's almost set in stone, and most Austrians agree that there was no alternative. This will happen now, and if the Freedom Party would have not been made part of this government, many experts say that the upcoming elections, the next elections in future, the Freedom Party would have gotten even more votes, maybe the absolute majority. So this is happening now, and we've already heard voices also from Germany, German politicians like Markus Söder, conservative CSU party leader, who said this is a warning to Germany, something similar could happen in Germany, and the mainstream parties should align to, as other German politicians said, to avoid the far right from rising also in Germany.
Johannes Peschberger in Vienna, thank you very much. South Korean investigators have requested an extension of the arrest warrant for President Yoon Suk-yeol. It comes as supporters and security service guards formed a human chain around his residence. Meanwhile, South Korean police have refused to serve the arrest warrant, saying the task should be left to anti-corruption investigators. President Yoon faces charges of insurrection and abuse of power after his failed attempt to impose martial law last month. The UK's Prime Minister says the debate online about child sexual exploitation is based on lies as he hit back at Elon Musk. It comes after Musk accused Keir Starmer of failing to tackle grooming gangs during his time as Director of Public Prosecutions. Opposition MPs are calling for a national child abuse inquiry. Starmer claims those spreading misinformation are not interested in victims but themselves. New York's congestion charge for drivers entering Manhattan began on Sunday. Motorists will now pay $9 during peak hours in the busiest areas. The charge, the first of its kind in the US, aims to reduce congestion while raising money for the city's public transport system.
Well, London's roads were the most congested in Europe in 2024. That's according to a new report. Traffic data analysis group INRIX says drivers in the British capital spent 101 hours sitting in traffic last year. That's up 2% from the previous year. It's also the fourth year in a row that London's roads have led Europe's congestion. The second most congested roads in Europe belong to Paris, close behind London, with 97 hours of delays per driver last year. And in third place, it's the Irish capital, Dublin, where it's 81 hours of delay per driver per year. Well, Rico Luman is senior economist at ING Bank with a focus on transport, logistics and the automotive industry. Good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Global Business. Now, I confess I'm a motorist and do drive here to work in London, and it comes as absolutely no surprise to me that I spent more than 100 hours sitting in my car last year. Why is traffic so bad in London?
Yeah, there's actually a few reasons for this. Obviously, London is a very big city, so the Greater London region covers a larger region than the Greater Paris region, for instance. So people need to commute longer distances. So that's one of the reasons behind this. Another one is that there's much more buses and also taxis on the roads, and people have higher ownerships of cars. Well, the density of cars is higher in London compared to other cities. And another one, of course, is that business intensity is very high in London, especially in the square mile, London City. So compared to other cities, traffic is much more intensive in London.
Okay, that's very interesting. Makes a lot of sense. So traffic gridlock does have an economic toll, doesn't it? Around $1 billion a year or more than that. What does that mean for the average Londoner and the broader economy, and what kind of impact does it have on businesses and local public services?
Yeah, well, it could mean a waste of time, of course, for people commuting. So that's a matter of a waste of time compared to probably a higher wage that people earn in London. Many people obviously live outside of London and Greater London because of house prices, of course. So that's the impact for the personal side of it. And for businesses, of course, it's it can be detrimental in terms of location factors. It's an important location factor to have this connectivity and to be easy reachable for people. So it can be detrimental when this goes up even further. On the other hand, we have to bear in mind that before the pandemic, so pre-pandemic, it was even worse. So it's on the rise, that's true, but it's less worse still than before the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it is. It's not quite as bad as it was before the pandemic. Still pretty bad here. Is there any evidence that traffic delays actually do nudge people's transportation habits? Do they head to the buses and the trains and bikes?
Could happen, indeed. People may be triggered to look into alternative modes, jumping on the tube, for instance, looking into, for instance, walking more or cycling to work. That could be interesting options to look into, or even to combine modes for transport. So that's kind of a new way of thinking, is to be multimodal, so to include multi-modal options of commuting. So that could be the consequence and also the impact of this.
And what about sustainable urban transport solutions like congestion pricing that we've got in London, New York is introducing today? Do they help to alleviate traffic problems and pollution? And what could New York learn from London's experience of charging?
Well, normally it would work. From an economic perspective, that's always very interesting because you may nudge people to avoid the city centers. So that could urge people and drivers in general to avoid certain regions. It could also lead to spreading of the congestion to other parts of the city. So that may be the downside of it. But in general, we could expect some avoidance on the back of this because of this pricing and higher cost of traveling.
Rico, really great to get your thoughts on this today. Thanks so much. Rico Luhmann, Senior Economist at ING Bank.
So one solution is potentially congestion charging, but could autonomous vehicles make our roads less congested? We're joined now by our correspondent, Jen Copesake. Great to see you. So,
nice to see you.
Are driverless cars the answer?
The answer is yes and no, and it's gradual.
Yeah.
So self-driving vehicles very much could be in the future of reducing congestion in cities around the world. That's down to a few factors, including the artificial intelligence capabilities in the cars, which means that they can communicate with each other on the road and with advanced traffic management systems. So positive effects could include the traffic flow. Autonomous vehicles can maintain a set distance between each vehicle. That could certainly reduce congestion, improve traffic flow. The real-time route mapping that AI systems facilitate could certainly help. And self-driving cars could reduce accidents in the future. They are projected to be safer than human drivers in the future. At the moment, human error accounts for between 94 to 96% of accidents. That's according to data from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in America. So yes, they could. We think so, definitely.
And what's China doing in this space, Jen?
So China's certainly leading the world in regulating this industry. There's already 19 cities in China where autonomous vehicle testing is underway. As of August last year, there were 16,000 test licenses for autonomous vehicles issued for road testing and 32,000 kilometers of road available for road tests. There was an announcement at the end of last year on December 31st that as of April 1st, more access to roads in the capital, Beijing, will be available to people who get new licenses that pass safety testing for their vehicles. So that's an exciting development. Regulators in China certainly see the space, the potential for accelerating commercialization. We see taxis on the road, robotaxis. We'll see more buses potentially with this new regulations from Beijing. For example, Baidu's robotaxi service Apollo Go, they launched in Wuhan in 2022 and expanded to 10 cities across China. They are forecasting to be operating in 100 cities by 2030. So that's a big expansion planned. Pony AI as well has 300 robotaxis and are planning to have 1,000 by 2026. And they're currently operating in Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou. If we compare that to the US, the picture is different. Of course, they're leaders as well in this autonomous vehicle technology, but the regulation is behind that of China. Proposed legislation on driverless cars has been stuck in Congress for 7 years. We think that perhaps with the new Trump administration, that may change.
We shall see. Fascinating stuff. Jen, thank you very much. Jen Copesake.
Well, let's talk about this a little bit more, in more detail, with David Bailey, who's Professor of Business Economics at Birmingham Business School. Great to see you, as always, David. So we've been hearing there about more test licenses. I want to talk about China's new regulations that came out at the end of last year for autonomous vehicles. It's all about the technology, isn't it, and allowing driverless taxis and buses in cities.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. So I think it's about allowing driverless taxis, buses, delivery vehicles to really develop the technology in China and to position China as the global leader in driverless vehicles going forward, as indeed it already is in terms of electric cars. So I think it's very much about developing the technology and the industry. I think there's a second part to it as well, which is that China sees huge social and economic benefits from driverless vehicles in terms of car sharing, reduced congestion, the ability to work in the car whether you're travelling. So I think they see as well a way of boosting the economy going forward.
So we're talking there about China as being a global leader in this space. So I wonder how what's being proposed in Beijing and Wuhan and other cities in China compares to the approach of other cities around the world.
Well, that was a great summary there from your colleague, and China is very much leading the way. We already see driverless vehicles, for example, in California, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, the likes of Waymo, for example, already doing that, and very limited trials in some European cities and some trials that have taken place in Singapore. But it's just the the scale of what is being proposed here, which is just massive compared with anything else. I mean, we've already seen some of it. Your colleague talked about Wuhan there, where some driverless kind of robo-taxis have been operating across a third to a half of the city. This is really opening up onto a much, much bigger scale. So it's way ahead, I think, of anything else around the world.
And you mentioned the impact it could have on economic growth region to region. What impact do you think that this push for autonomous is going to mean for the broader automotive industry in China?
I think it will ultimately mean a transformation, as we've started to see already with the electric car industry. So China is already way ahead of other countries in terms of developing the electric vehicle industry, thanks to a very supportive industrial policy over the last 25 years. So China is already leading in that space. The next step beyond that is autonomous vehicles, and it will mean, I think, a completely new value chain going forward. So based on autonomous electric vehicles, it links in with artificial intelligence, it links in with cloud-based computing, it links to the apps that consumers will use to order their driverless cars and plan their journeys. So it really means, I think, ultimately a transformation of the value chain going forward. It's not going to happen immediately, it's going to take some time, but things will be very different in the future. And if we think about the future as a consumer, ultimately the idea is to be able to summon a driverless taxi. You won't need to own a car in some of these big cities.
I've got so much more to talk to you about, but we have to leave it there. David Bailey, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
And you're watching CGTN, still ahead. Blown off the top spot. Gas overtaken by wind turbines as Britain's top source of energy. Stay with us.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back. Wind turbines have overtaken gas as Britain's biggest source of electricity for a whole year for the first time. Wind accounted for 29% of the nation's electricity last year, while gas fell to around a quarter. And all this comes as the UK government pushes ahead with plans to decarbonise the nation's electricity system by 2030. Well, Frankie Mayo is a senior analyst at energy think tank Ember. Great to have you on Global Business Europe. Now, why is wind power becoming more important?
Great to be here. Wind power is so important because of its cost savings and its energy security benefits. So renewables in the UK have helped to cut its reliance on gas power, meaning less expensive fossil fuels in the energy mix. And the gas has been the largest source of power in the UK for about a decade, but that's all changing now.
The UK government push to decarbonise the nation's electricity system by 2030 will mean stopping using the UK's 32 main gas-fired power stations. I mean, what are the trade-offs here? I'm thinking jobs, I'm thinking costs.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the government's 2030 target is for a clean power system, which means reducing that role of expensive gas down to below 5%. So there will still be a small backup role for a reserve of gas power plants, but they'll be contributing far less to emissions and therefore to costs. At the end of last year, the new National Electricity Systems Operator reported that this could be achieved by 2030 without a rise in consumer costs. But more important than a one-off reduction, this is about longer-term protection from future price spikes like the UK has seen in recent years.
Well, you mentioned price spikes, but something else that we can't predict, of course, is the weather. It's something that we can't count on. In early November, for example, Britain's wind generation plunged to virtually zero. I mean, does wind really offer that energy security you're talking about?
Yeah, of course, every power source has its trade-offs. In terms of energy security, like you asked, the issue of relying too much on international gas markets has been very evident in the UK over the last few years. But of course, we know solar generates more in the summer, wind power generates more in the winter. So in that respect, they're a good match for each other. But of course, small periods of low wind speeds never going to go away, so it's important to build a flexible energy system able to deal with the British weather. So that means more energy storage, it means better connectivity in the UK as well as connecting with Europe, and more responsive demand.
The UK is positioning itself as a bit of a leader in this space, and there's this proposal to classify wind turbines and solar farms as nationally significant infrastructure projects. So that's going to allow them to be treated with the same sort of importance as airports and power plants. What's your take on that?
Planning policy has been identified as one of the key barriers to renewables, so it's positive that this is being looked at, but really this is a return to normal planning procedures for energy projects. Offshore wind, solar at a certain level have already been under this national process. Onshore wind was effectively banned in the UK up until this planning rule was revoked. So there's always a balance needed, but real speed is required for these new wind and solar projects if targets are to be met. So getting a consistent and a rational planning approach is certainly critical for that.
Frankie Mayo at Ember, thank you very much.
Thanks.
And finally, TV series Shogun dominated this year's Golden Globe Awards. The Japanese historical drama picked up 3 acting prizes for its stars, while also taking home the Best Award for Best TV Drama. Other big winners included hit Netflix show Baby Reindeer and the films Wicked, Emilia Perez and The Brutalist.
Your headlines again. After nearly a decade in the role, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau steps down, saying it's time for a reset. US Steel and Nippon Steel sue the Biden administration for blocking the $14 billion takeover by the Japanese company. And China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi begins his 4-country tour of Africa, holding a meeting with Namibia's president-elect and the outgoing leader.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.